For many, Cube is the apotheosis of Magic the Gathering, the ultimate draft environment. And yet, many Magic the Gathering players have Cube questions. So who better to ask than Milo himself?
So first of all, I just want to say, how cool is it that Tolarian just did an intro on a video on Milo the Gathering? I think that's pretty cool. I'm kind of fanboying a little bit here.
What's the best advice you can give to someone building their first cube?
I think the best advice that I could give to somebody is to listen to their play group. Building a cube is an experience with your friends. It's not just building a deck that you're piloting solo. Even though you're the creator of this limited environment, to make sure all archetypes are viable, or all the strategies that you want to be viable are viable, you're going to need to play test, your friends are going to need to build decks, and they're going to have suggestions for you, and I really suggest you listen to them, because multiple perspectives can lead to a more diverse, limited environment.
Why do most cube experts stick to singleton cubes? Why not have multiple copies of a card? Why not separate commons and uncommons and rares so that you build a pack with that same ratio like you would a normal booster pack?
This is Cube. You make Cube however you want to make Cube. But honestly, the amount of work it is to separate all the cards by common, uncommon, and rare, and then build packs that way is just not worth it. Since Cube traditionally is singleton, every card is just as rare as every other card. Tarmogoyf is just as rare as Brainstorm. Separating cards based on rarity and then putting 11 commons, 3 uncommons, and a rare or mythic in every pack just seems like a huge nuisance that I wouldn't wish upon any Magic player. And take it from me, at the end of the night, you'll be lucky if you can get the players to separate the basic lands from the other cards in the deck.
What are your thoughts on a commander cube? How does that even work?
From my understanding, what you do first is a small draft of just commanders, and then people pick commanders. Then you do a normal draft, but you can only play cards that are of your commander's colors. It sounds fun. If anyone watching this has done a commander cube, has a commander cube, anything like that, please let me know in the comments. Let me know how you did it, and let me know if it's any fun.
What's the preferred ratio of creatures to spells to lands?
I think you gotta go with your heart on this one. From my experience though, I did a 50-50 split between creatures and spells for black, white, and red. Green, I put in a little more creatures than spells, and blue, I put in a little bit more spells than creatures, but that split would have been pretty close to, it would have been like 60-40 creatures in green and 60-40 spells to non-creatures in blue. And then as time goes on and new sets come out, cut cards that are just underperforming, and don't worry too much if they're creatures. What's more important is the casting cost of the cards that you're cutting. So if you cut a 2-drop, try to put in a 1, 2, or 3-drop to replace it. Try not to cut a bunch of 1s and 2s and put in 6s and 7s, because that can really shift the balance a lot more than focusing on, is it a creature, is it a spell? Also, like spells that produce creatures, consider those creatures as well. Like a Lingering Souls is probably a creature, it's not a spell, or like a Dragon Fodder or something like that. As for lands, count your mana fixing duels as gold cards for that color combination. So Tundra is white-blue, and Arid Mesa is a red-white card. Then all of your non-basic lands that work with a color, like Sheldock Isle, Volrath Stronghold, or Treetop Village, all count as cards of the color mana that they require or produce, since you wouldn't run them in a deck that was not of that color. All of the non-basic lands that tap for colorless mana, or now diamond mana, or require an activation cost that isn't of a specific color, you should just count as colorless cards, as like a Batterskull or a Karn or an Emrakul. And then I think you can have as many colorless cards in your cube as cards of any one color. Just say you have something like 75 red cards, 75 like blue cards, then you could probably have 75 colorless cards, and included in that is equipment, artifact creatures, colorless spells, and colorless lands that do not require an activation cost of a certain mana or produce color of a certain mana. I'd also consider some Phyrexian mana cards, like I think Porcelain Legionnaire and Phyrexian Metamorph are both colorless cards. as opposed to a blue card and a white card, because I would play Porcelain Legionnaire in all of the mono red decks I've ever drafted in Cube. It's not necessarily a white card. Sure, you would play it in a white deck sometimes, but the fact that it has a Phyrexian white mana in it is never going to factor into my decision if I should play the card or not.
What's a good place to get feedback from others on my cube or to have others test my cube?
CubeTutor.com is an amazing resource. There's a whole bunch of different cubes there that you can steal different ideas from. If you do have your cube on there, make sure you take a look at what other people are drafting, and you can see which cards are the least drafted, what cards are the most highly drafted. You can learn a lot from the data available on CubeTutor.com. Also Reddit, Magic Reddit is a great resource. They have a specific cube subreddit, which I recommend going on there, asking questions, read some of the threads. It's super helpful stuff, and a lot of people are doing a lot of interesting things that you can steal ideas from.
How do you play cube with fewer than 8 people? What are some styles for 4 people or even 3?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer to. If only there was somebody who is really good at cube that I could ask.
All right, finally, here we go. I've been waiting as you list through these questions, and I've got some answers for you. Let's get started. So cubing with less than 8 people is a very common problem. Myself living in the Greater Toronto area, I still have problems finding 8 people. Believe it or not, there's got to be thousands and thousands of Magic players here, and I still can't get a group of 8. So, when someone like me can't get 8, obviously other people are going to have problems as well. There's lots of ways I've tried to combat this, and there's lots of resources online. If you do just want to Google it, lots of people have written articles on it. Some of the better ones I've heard for drafting with less than 8 people, you can just do a sealed. Sealed is pretty common. You can do a Winston or a grid draft. There's variations on those as well. I do want to talk a little bit about the 100 card sealed. It's a great way if you have tons of time to kill. You can actually just take 100 cards, you build 3 decks, and you against another person, and you just play 1 game of each of your decks against each of theirs. So that's 9 games, best 5 out of 9. You get to play 3 different decks, tons of time, tons of fun to play. It's a complete blast. And for grid drafting, I actually read an article on Channel Fireball recently. I know they're our competitor here, but I will plug them for a second. One of the guys who wrote there suggested actually cutting an entire color when you're drafting with less than 8 people. Part of the problem is there's not enough competition for colors when you have less people. So if you have 4 drafters and only 1 green drafter, they get every single green card. So what I'm going to try on my next grid draft is we're going to roll before the draft starts and pick a color at random. And every time we see a card from that color in the pack, take it out. If it happens to be blue and someone's upset, who cares? Take it out. Blue's out. Blue's gone. You have to draft either green, white, red, or black. That sounds to me really interesting, so we're going to give it a try, but again, there's tons of ways to do it.
How do you ensure that your cube is balanced?
Short answer is you don't have to. Your cube doesn't have to be balanced. If you really like blue, you can make blue the best color, or you can make more cards blue than any other cards in your cube. But most players like to have a balance, at least either between the colors or between archetypes like aggro and control. Obviously playing your cube, if you start to see a trend, there's adjustments you can make. Even small changes can make a big difference to the cube. One of the things that I really like to do in my own cube was I noticed that the aggressive decks were struggling a little bit, so I actually changed the mana base and cut the lands that I was using and added the pain lands. The pain lands being not really affecting the aggressive decks because they don't mind the life loss, but the control players taking an extra 3 or 4 damage over the course of a game really made it more possible for them to be aggressive. So there's small things you can do. You can also cap your cube for power on certain things. My cube doesn't include some of the traditional powerhouses like Mind Twist, Library of Alexandria, Recurring Nightmare, things like that. So it's really up to you where you want to put it and how you want to adjust it in the future.
Powered versus unpowered.
So powered cubes include the Power 9, which are some of the 9 most powerful cards printed in Magic's history traditionally. Those include the 5 Moxen, Black Lotus, Time Twister, Ancestral Recall, and Time Walk. All those cards are never going to be printed again. They're way too powerful, so it really depends on what you're looking for in your cube. If you do include those, you can expect the games to be a lot more swingy when they're drawn. For example, if one player casts an Ancestral Recall, the other player is going to have a very hard time catching up because there's nothing on that power level. As to whether or not to include it in your cube, it's completely up to you, but a common question when you're playing a new cube is whether or not the cube does have power. And if you answer yes, then it's a pretty good indication that your cube is going to include a lot of the most expensive and most powerful cards ever printed. And that's how you become a Lundstedt winner.
Alright, that's enough from Mark Anderson. Let's move on.
What cards should not be put in cube?
There are cards in some people's cubes that I like to call red herrings. What this means is that sometimes you'll see a card that'll make it look like a deck strategy or archetype is supported, but actually isn't. Cards like that would be something like maybe Intangible Virtue, something that says like, all creature tokens get +1/+1 in Vigilance, sweet, and then have nothing that produces creature tokens in your cube, or just like one card. Another example of this is something like if you had a Trail of Mystery and a Secret Plans in a cube, and then just like maybe 5 morphs, and like 2 of them are Exalted Angel and Blistering Firecat, just off color for those 2 support cards. That might make somebody think that they could play Trail of Mystery. They might take it too high because they're like excited about playing this weird morph mechanic that maybe they weren't playing during Khans of Tarkir and weren't able to do it. And now all of a sudden it's not supported and their first couple picks are just dead cards, blank cards, red herrings. Another type of card that I wouldn't want to put into a cube is something that's extremely situational. So, for example, unless your cube has a huge enchantment theme, I wouldn't want to put Erase in the cube. I would rather put something like Disenchant. And then there's also cards that require multiple copies of them to be good. So like Squadron Hawk, you know, you're not going to put, if your cube is a traditional Singleton cube, you're not going to put Squadron Hawk in your cube, or like the Tron lands, or the new Hedron alignment card. But like, these are cards that you wouldn't put in cube because they would make no sense, they wouldn't do anything. Now, having said that, I do know a guy named Kyle Weltman. He's a great dude, huge fan of cube, and he's a smart guy. And what he has decided to do for his modern cube is have voucher draft picks. So when you draft Squadron Hawk, you're drafting a Squadron Hawk voucher for 3 other copies of Squadron Hawk. Or if you're drafting a Tron land, you actually get a voucher for all 3 of them. Or if you draft a Valakut, you get a full set. Stuff like that. It might be something that you want to do. It might not be. Either way, cube is your format to create and try new things. And I definitely suggest that you do that.
What are some of the most common mistakes made when designing your own cube?
People tend to favor a deck that they enjoy playing. So when building a cube, that deck is going to be a lot stronger than decks that they don't enjoy playing. Just make sure that you equally support multiple strategies when building a cube. Just say you like playing Control and you have some store credit and there's 2 things available to add to your cube. There's a Goblin Guide and there's a Cryptic Command. A lot of people are probably going to pick that Cryptic Command if they enjoy Control. But what if aggro is lacking and aggro needs some help? Maybe it's a better idea to use that stored credit, grab that Goblin Guide. This also helps when you talk to the players that are drafting your cube. Ask them what the most powerful card they saw in the draft was. Ask them if there was anything that they saw that was unbeatable. Ask them what the worst card they drafted was, and try to find out a little bit more information about what went right or what went wrong for the people who are playing your cube other than yourself.
What's your favorite card that seldomly sees play anywhere else but in cube?
So first of all, Crystal Shards and Erratic Portal. These 2 artifacts are great. I consider Crystal Shards a blue card because I would never want to pay 3 mana to use its ability. And Erratic Portal is a colorless card. Both of them kind of do the same thing. They have the ability to bounce a creature to its owner's hand unless the controller pays 1. This works on a bunch of different levels. First of all, in its most basic level, it can return your opponent's creature to their hand when they're tapped out. This is generally the first way that the card is played when it enters the battlefield. So the thing that makes Erratic Portal and Crystal Shard so great is that they can be used in a lot of different ways. So you can, in combat, block with a creature that you own, and then return it to your hand before damage is dealt. This creates a bit of an infinite blocker scenario. Now, the way that most people want to use Crystal Shard and Erratic Portal is with enters the battlefield triggers and their creatures. So if you have something like a Mystic Snake, 1 in a green, 2 blue, 2/2, when it enters the battlefield, counters a spell, it has flash, and a Crystal Shard, you've essentially soft locked your opponent. Unless they have an out to this combo, you can counter a spell that they play every turn. This is also really good with a card like Avalanche Riders, which is 3 in a red, 2/2 haste, Echo. When it comes into play, destroy a land. You can actually stack Echo and then bounce your Avalanche Riders to your hand on your upkeep, so that you don't have to pay the 3 in a red the next turn. And every turn now for the rest of the game, unless your opponent has an answer to it, you're destroying a land that they control. So it's again a soft lock on your opponent. Another card I want to talk about, it's actually more of a mechanic on a card. The card is Puppeteer Clique. It's 3 and 2 black. It's a flying creature with persist. When it enters the battlefield, you return a creature from your opponent's graveyard into play on your side, and it gains haste, and you exile it at end of turn. The reason why this card is good is because it has an enters the battlefield ability that you're going to trigger twice, because it has persist. So when it dies, it comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. The fact that you're playing cube means that everybody probably has busted creatures in their deck, so being able to reanimate just from your opponent's graveyard isn't a big drawback. This card also works really well with things like Birthing Pod, Recurring Nightmare. I mean, what doesn't work with Recurring Nightmare? And even clone effects. So a phantasmal image that targets a Puppeteer Clique still gets to come back into play, and when it comes back into play with -1/-1 counter, it can actually choose another creature. So it persists, and then you get to choose a new target. You can still choose the Puppeteer Clique if you like, but you can choose anything, which is pretty cool for clone effects. The fact that the creature has an enters the battlefield ability and persist makes it a very interesting cube card that can be abused very easily. I also, could have just as easily said Kitchen Finks. However, that probably shines in a lot of formats. So that's it. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you have any questions about Cube, please leave them in the comments. Either I will answer it, or other viewers will have answers for you as well. Maybe we can make the comment section of this video a forum for Cube Q&A. In addition to that, I'm going to make a video based on one of the questions you ask in the comments. The person who asked that question is going to get a sweet Cube Tutor t-shirt. That's pretty awesome, I think. I love this t-shirt. I got it by asking Ben Titmarsh a question in the comments of one of his videos. Also, big thanks to Tolarian Community College for all the help on this video, as well as former Canadian national champion Mark Anderson for those extra answers. And thank you for watching. Take care, everybody. Bye.